Great, thank you. So it's going to be a speed round, so let's get right to it. To set the tone, I wanted to talk a little bit. In April this year, JPMorgan Chase launched our Pro Neighborhoods Initiative. It's a $125 million initiative over 5 years, really focused on some of the key challenges that neighborhoods face, gentrification, lack of community commerce. And the initiative really focuses on encouraging CDFIs, community financial development institutions, to collaborate. A CDFI is uniquely chartered to do low-income lending in tough neighborhoods, essentially. And so we had a number of pilot programs that built up to this announcement. And in 2013, we actually put out an RFP and awarded $33 million in grants to 26 organizations across the country that came up with ideas to collaborate. We were very excited in Chicago that 3 of our partners secured a $5 million grant, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So why don't you both describe how your organization serves local communities and how your mission-driven CDFIs?
Me first?
Yes.
All right, so neighborhood housing services, basically we pool public and private capital to create pathways to home ownership. So we coach people on home ownership, we provide classes, but we also make loans, rehab loans and home mortgage loans, and then we help people become civically engaged in their community and teach them how to maintain their house financially and physically, and how to work on challenges and issues in their neighborhoods. Great.
And Jack?
Hi, Jack Markowski from Community Investment Corporation. We're kind of the other side of the coin from NHS. When NHS in residential development in Chicago's low and moderate income communities, NHS specializes in home ownership. We specialize in apartment buildings and multifamily lending. And so we lend money to the people who buy and rehab and own the vast majority of apartment buildings throughout Chicago's neighborhoods, particularly low and moderate income neighborhoods. The other thing that I think both of us have in common is, as Dan said, we're called CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, and we are generally capitalized by investments from banks. So we have 40 banks that invest in us that provide the capital for our lending activity.
So when you thought about collaboration, what were some of the initial challenges that you saw that drove this collaboration between your organizations?
Well, so this building here, these are 2 flats, and the collaboration was very interesting. NHS and CIC have worked together over the years. Just we complement each other, as I said. But and in general in Chicago, I would say we were motoring along pretty well throughout the city, right up to the crash. And to some degree, as we all realize, there was a false economy, there was inflated, irresponsible lending, there was fraud, there was recklessness in the whole financial sector. But on the back of all of that, partially, the neighborhoods throughout the city were doing well. When the crash came, and then the recovery after that, and the crash affected different areas very differently. In some of the strongest areas in Chicago, maybe the market crashed 10%. In other areas, in the low and moderate income areas on the south and west side, the market, the housing values might have crashed 85%, we've seen. I mean, they totally fell apart. And they fell apart, they lost dramatic vacancies, foreclosures, the economy was kicked out of these, the retail stores left, so you had lots of vacancy. That was the main characteristic throughout the south and west side. As we worked on the recovery, we, from our shop, were doing multifamily lending, and as you know, the rental market across the country came back first and has come back strongest. But in Chicago, it came back in the strongest neighborhoods first, obviously, where rents are sky high and there's no vacancies whatsoever. But vacancies characterize the low and moderate income neighborhoods. So particularly with these buildings, these 2 flats, so there's this category of buildings, 1 to 4 unit buildings, that traditionally had been used for owner occupancy, and that's exactly where all the foreclosures took place, leaving thousands of these vacant buildings across the city, virtually no home buyer demand for these buildings. And as we looked at the neighborhoods, we said, what's going to happen with these buildings? Because traditionally there hadn't been financing programs for investors to own collections of these buildings as well. Oddly enough, it's funny, we all don't realize this, we in housing know this, 50% of the rental stock in Chicago and in the country are actually in these buildings. But this was these 2 flats, which is to give you an idea of what they look like. That was the problem. They were empty. They were out of the housing stock. They were located in neighborhoods that had crashed. Very little home buyer demand, and vacancy was characteristic. So we wanted to collectively develop a program to address this from our various perspectives.
Kristin, any thoughts on the partnership?
So it's like any partnership. It takes a little while, but it's going really great. A couple of things to know about. So we work with homeowners, and homeowners don't want just if there's going to be a rental property next door, the key is that it be a hands-on landlord, a responsible landlord, not an absentee landlord. So we know that CIC works with exactly those kinds of landlords, the hands-on responsible landlords. So it was a great partnership in that CIC also had the ability to come in and acquire those vacant buildings, the 1 to 4s, and then there's a third partner, CCLF, they can provide some financing for developers, and then there's NHS, we can provide financing for the homeowners. And so together, we're getting a hold of the empty buildings, we're providing the financing for a responsible owner, and our emphasis is on home ownership. And then basically what you have is house by house, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, you start seeing a revitalized community. And we have some examples of that.
So we're 2.5 years in. This is, I think, a great example of some of the progress you've made. Jack, you want to walk us through?
Well, this is just an example. So we're across, when you say where do we deal in Chicago, we're primarily, I say, low and moderate income areas, south and west side, but inevitably we end up targeting, and that in a good way, target some communities. And because I think one of the lessons here is if there's thousands of these vacant buildings throughout the city, it doesn't do much good to rehab one over here and one over there and one over there. And plus, people don't want to live there anyway. You have to have, I think, a vision of the community, what it can look like going forward in a multifaceted approach. So this is just an example. One of our target communities is in Woodlawn, immediately south of Hyde Park and Washington Park, near the University of Chicago. And we think the Obama Library is going to end up somewhere in this vicinity. But this is an example of just the range of kinds of investments that we make in an area. There's some multifamily loans, there's some single family purchase rehab loans, there's acquisitions of a large Section 8 project on the eastern edge of this, but it's a whole range. There's code enforcement activities. A whole range of complementary activities is what's needed to drive the community forward to a new reality. And in our collaborative that we're working on, it's coming along very well.
And the grant itself, it was a $5 million grant. We've turned that $5 million into $20 million worth of investment into the community. Actually, our leverage is even higher, $1.5 million into $15 million of lending. So that's one of the really great things is the ability for that money to leverage the private sector capital and really reinvest in these communities. We've done over 400 units across the city, and Woodlawn is just an example of an area that we've targeted. You want to see
Oh yeah, sorry.
There's the next picture. This is an example of on the left, what you see is a 2-flat, boarded up, empty. On the right, what you see is the kickoff of a new effort called Renew Woodlawn. And on the right-hand side of those group of people, the far right is Courtney, the new homeowner, and you can see the picture of the house, which is now fully rehabbed. And you want to talk about all the partners involved in that?
Well, yeah, so this is an example. So Kristin and I are working, NHS and CIC, working on the platform of this collaborative program with Chase. But even our collaboration needs to be much broader to have impact in the community, so that here, among the people present here is a representative of POA, that's Preservation of Affordable Housing. They actually got a $30 million choice neighborhood grant in the Woodlawn community for Woodlawn to drive a lot of it. There's the local alderman. There's the Commissioner David Riefman of the Department of Planning and Development. There's representatives from HUD and the local alderman there in addition. So all of that is needed. And and one of the things I would say, we are working now with this Renew Woodlawn program. So I said a couple things earlier. One, there was on these vacant buildings, the 1 to 4s, traditionally they had been owner-occupied, but there was not the demand in most neighborhoods for renewed owner occupancy. Woodlawn is an exception to that because of its proximity to Hyde Park, the University of Chicago, the lakefront. We're really giving it, we think there's the potential, and we've committed to the community. We said, don't worry, we're not going to fill your 2 flats with renters and investors. The emphasis is going to be home ownership. And so that's what this program has put us in a position to do that. And I say put us in the position because from our perspective, we've been able to go out with the money we had from Chase and buy the buildings. So that one of the things we're starting the program with is 25 buildings that we've already bought that then NHS is going to be marketing to the homeowners and helping them put together acquisition rehab loans to be reoccupied by home buyers.
We have offices located in the community, and so we source the home buyers and work with them and get them ready for home ownership. One of the things I'd like to emphasize about why do you even need grants? I mean, we're here to help prime the housing market and get it functioning well, so why do you even need a grant to do this? What you have to know about, at least our neighborhoods in Chicago, and it's like this actually in many communities across the country, low and moderate communities, you buy a house for $100,000, you put $50,000 worth of rehab in it, and it appraises at $120,000. So there's a constant gap. There's this constant gap between what the house needs to be fixed up and lived in because of the age of the housing stock and also because of the low appraisal values typically in lower income communities and communities of color. And so we're constantly fighting and trying to fill that gap. And that's why this grant helped us then leverage other capital to come in and always try to fill that gap that then helps us and basically work with the residents in the communities to revitalize their communities.
As I mentioned, we did 2 years of pilot CDFI grants before we launched Pro Neighborhoods. And this was really one of the first, most successful grants we had in 2013. And we were really excited it was in Chicago. You guys were terrific partners.
Great.
And a lot of what you learned helped us create the Pro Neighborhoods program. For those who are interested, we do have brochures in the back that will go into a little bit more detail. And the first year of funding was $33 million, and we had the Harvard Joint Center on Housing and Studies do a study of that funding. And it did bring down an additional $226 million in assets across the country that provided over $100 million in loans. It provided the preservation and development of over 200,000 affordable housing units, lending to over 130 small businesses, and the creation and retention of nearly 2,700 jobs. And so, we think it's been very successful. And again, you were instrumental in helping us launch the broader program.
Great. Well, we're happy to do that. And what was great, I think, about the Chase money too, is it was flexible money. It was, as Kristin says, it was grant money, flexible money. We proposed this is how we're going to use it. We're using it for acquisition. Kristin's using it for loan loss reserves for their home improvement loans. CCLF is using it for redevelopment financing for their pool. So all of it works together, but it really kind of fuels everything else.
Great. So no time for questions with this panel. Thank you for your involvement. We will be in the back if folks have any questions. Great. Thank you.
Thanks.